Action Hour, our guest is WEAN Executive Director Marnie Jackson, and we are here to discuss the comprehensive planning process in Island County, which is really exciting. First of all, thanks for being back on the podcast, Marnie.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's exciting to have you here. I'm glad we get to have conversations together about, some of the programming that WEAN's involved in, and comprehensive planning is a huge one. I know we've done a couple of podcast episodes with Marion and Steve on kind of their relationship with comprehensive planning, but you and I, through this process, have formed our own relationship with it. And WEAN has a really long relationship with comprehensive planning and the Growth Management Act. So I guess to start off, just if you could help give our listeners kind of an overview of what the comprehensive planning process is and WEAN's involvement with it and the Growth Management Act.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. I feel like WEAN's participation in holding Island County accountable to follow the Growth Management Act is one of the most central aspects of our organizational identity since the Growth Management Act was passed into law. So that took place in Washington State in 1990. And it was really to help ensure that in the pressure of development and population growth, Washington State didn't lose its fundamental environmental health and quality of life. And so this act by the state legislature was supposed to make sure that jurisdictions plan responsibly. So plan to keep development where development belongs in areas that are served by public utilities and transportation, et cetera. And then to make sure that the quality of life and the quality of ecosystems for including beyond human life are protected in rural areas and in wild areas. And so WEAN got involved in comprehensive planning very early on, including through what became a 25-year legal battle with Island County to make sure that its first comprehensive plan was law-abiding. Mm-hmm. And those challenges really stretched from the mid-1990s all the way through until very recently. And in this current round of comprehensive planning, we've been really attempting to bring a spirit of collaboration and a spirit of de-siloing issues and forming explicit collaborations across issue areas, joining in a consortium with representatives of other sectors like affordable housing and agriculture, and then participating early and often to the best of our ability during Island County's comprehensive plan update, which is required at 10-year intervals. And we're currently in one of those update cycles. So WEAN's work has been not just the accountability side through the Growth Management Hearings Board and through these legal appeals, but also proactively as a partner in planning early and often.
So we mentioned that the reason why there's comprehensive planning is the Growth Management Act.
Yes.
And I guess I would just want to make sure that people can understand why the comprehensive plan is important and what it is, right? Because I feel like that's like foundational to it. And I've noticed that when I talk to people, they don't even know, it's like, what even is this process? Why does it matter? What is it doing? And then how do I engage with it? Like, it's kind of obscure and then overwhelming.
Right. So when I first started getting involved in comprehensive planning, I underestimated the power that it has to allow us to enforce environmental protections that seem to go far beyond planning. Mm-hmm. And so, for instance, I learned that things like our critical areas ordinances, things like our development ordinances, the setbacks that streams get, whether those are 25 feet or 50 feet or 100 feet, all of these things are shaped by the commitments that Island County makes in its comprehensive plan. And in Washington State, the comprehensive plan that is adopted by a jurisdiction actually becomes legally binding guidance for the way that it evolves over the ensuing 20 years. Mm-hmm. And so if there's a stated goal in our comprehensive plan of advancing a certain type of activity, just hypothetically, let's say if we adopt a priority that getting a donkey into every family is a stated priority in Island County, then I could go litigate against the county for failing to launch a donkey procurement program. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's a ridiculous example that I only used because I have a donkey and he's adorable. But, it really becomes binding. What the plan promises, the county must deliver. Mm-hmm. And what the plan fails to constrain can proliferate unchecked to a certain extent.
Right. So this is a visioning document. Right? It's and the planners in this process have said over and over again that this is the what, not the how. Right. So like the idea that, there's this piece of legislation whose primary objective is to, eliminate unstrained development within the state. And then each qualifying county, so those counties that have a certain population density or on a trajectory of growth, all have to plan during a planning period by creating this document called the Comprehensive Plan, which is a visioning document that is the what. What is the county going to do in terms of development over the next 20 years, like within the certain areas of land use, economic development, housing, natural resources, parks and recreation, transportation, capital facilities and utilities, climate, sub-area plans. So like, for areas that need to be developed on their own or within the context of a smaller footprint. And then two elements that aren't being looked at this year, which is shoreline, which is under the Shoreline Master Program, and the historic element. And the what of all of those things that were just listed create the sum total of the comprehensive plan, which is the visioning document for planning for a 20-year period, which you just said is a binding legal document that then is translated into our critical areas ordinances, our development ordinances, and our county code.
Yes. And later on, the county code will be held up against the adopted plan, and we will ask, is this supportable by the plan? Mm-hmm. Are these ordinances aligned with the spirit of the plan? Do they realize the promise of the plan? And if the answer to that question is no, they are not aligned with the plan, they do not realize the spirit of the plan, then they are legally vulnerable to an attack and or being overturned or revised. And so a major risk is when planners talk about reducing redundancy by reducing the lines that are duplicative of county code, we run the risk that those lines in county code can now be overturned because they aren't in answer to content of the adopted plan.
Right. The plan needs to be consistent with itself and consistent with the code and consistent with state law.
Yes. And the code will be revised to reflect the plan.
Yeah.
Plan is updated and then the code revisions follow. So the coming years will bring a review of the critical area ordinances later in 2026. Mm-hmm. And throughout that process, planners and environmentalists and concerned community members will look back at the adopted comprehensive plan and say, what does it say about how we protect our critical areas? What does it say about how we respond to sea level rise? What does it say about what we value? And then the code gets updated to honor those commitments.
Yeah. So in some ways, even though it's not exactly a contract, it is kind of like the primary overarching contractual agreement between the community and the county and how it's going to build stuff.
That's an interesting way of framing it. Yes.
Yeah. So, and then everything else is like the implementation, right? Is like, how do we implement this agreement that we've all made?
Right. And you mentioned that the county leadership keeps talking about how this is the what, not the how. But there is a vital important ingredient in the how that has to be adopted soon, and that is the capital improvement plan and the transportation improvement plan. Those both have to talk about what funding is available to realize the planning in terms of infrastructure. And so we have asserted that there's a major concurrency gap, that the needs for septic systems that handle group level waste exist in the county's comprehensive plan draft as it was put forward and are not answered in the capital improvement funding plan. So there's no promise in the funded CIP about how the county gets grant funding or pays into development of group septic alternatives in any way. And so when the housing element says there's going to be a significant increase in density of housing in areas like Clinton, for instance, and the funded capital improvement plan has a $0 line item for septic infrastructure, we have a major concern about a failure of concurrency in planning.
Right. Because while the document is the what, there does need to be a roadmap to the how being, how are you going to pay for this?
Right.
Right.
It's a plan, not a wish.
Yes. Yes. And so okay. Yeah. I'm glad that we went through that, because I think that is where the comprehensive plan sits and where it lives within all of the other kind of plans and projects and budgets and code considerations is really important, I think, for people to understand why we take this so seriously, why it is at the heart of WEAN's work as an environmental organization, because everything stems from this document.
Right. It really is the guiding vision. It is the goalpost for where we want to go over the next 20 years as a community.
Mm-hmm. And I would say even longer, because even though the planning period is 20 years, a lot of the goals and policies that are implemented have lasting impact, right? If you make a development decision or you let people build somewhere, you can't undo that.
Right. As an example, in the 90s, we fought Island County on the shoreline zoning that was put forward as a result of comprehensive planning that basically would have allowed suburban level development on all 200 miles of Island County shorelines. Challenged that and won. And that is why we have undeveloped stretches of beach and salmon habitat. But had we not challenged that, that wouldn't have been a 10-year impact or a 20-year impact. That would have been a forever impact. And it would have affected the entire Salish Sea and beyond as far as the food web.
Yes, exactly. A big part of the point, as far as I understand it, of comprehensive planning is to get community input so that the whatever land use plan is generated for a county is representative of the residents of that county. And so people, individuals and organizations participating in this process, is vital to the outcome of the plan being as representative as possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the as you said, Marion and Steve and WEAN has been involved in the comprehensive planning process for Island County from its very inception. In fact, litigation from WEAN forced Island County to adopt its first comprehensive plan in 1998. And I would say that, something that I think that has been really interesting for me in this process is to really understand how much goes into this planning document, that it really is, it's called the comprehensive plan, but also it is comprehensive in nature. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So 9 elements are being updated.
Okay.
It looks like, which includes the Clinton sub-area plan. But yeah, there are quite a few, different sectors that are being considered: land use, economic development, housing, natural resources, parks and recreation, transportation, capital facilities and utilities, climate, which is new, this year, and the Clinton sub-area plan, which is like a smaller comprehensive plan just for Clinton.
Right.
And you and I have been engaged in this process since, at least since I came on, because I've been looking at the timeline, the county timeline, and it looks like technically the project launch for this planning period was summer through fall of 2023.
Yes. In fall of 2023, we started submitting our first comments to Island County on the subject. Mm-hmm. In 2024, we formed a formal consortium with Island Roots Housing and the Agricultural Resources Committee of Island County. Mm-hmm. And in that consortium, we gratefully accepted fiscal sponsorship from Goosefoot so that we could have an umbrella entity, and we applied for funding from the Department of Commerce, and that funding, which amounted to almost $80,000, was split between our three organizations to make sure that we were really bringing advocacy from our community constituents forward in sync with the county's stated timeline of comprehensive planning, in alignment with those initial phases, which were later adjusted for a moving adoption deadline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this has been going on for almost 3 years. Not quite, like 2.5. And the way I understand it is they launched the project, and then there's this whole process that happens prior to the planners starting to actually draft new language for the comprehensive plan or to amend the existing language, which is the countywide planning policies. Can you explain what that is and why it happens before any of the other planning begins?
Sure. I'll touch on it. I wish I were as much of an expert on that subject as Marion and Steve are, but to my knowledge, part of adopting countywide planning policies before one plans is to ensure that the planning policies outline the means by which one plans, mm-hmm. and B, to ensure that the planning policies adopt a population allocation. Mm-hmm. And that is done in collaboration with the Washington State Department of Commerce, which gives each county sort of an assigned range from which to choose. Mm-hmm. And so the Department of Commerce will study data available about population growth trends and land use and land capacity, and they will basically assign each jurisdiction who is required to adopt a plan a range to choose from. So they may give a low estimate of population projection, a mid estimate of population projection, and a high estimate of population projection. And then the jurisdiction is supposed to accept public feedback, do some analyses, and come back with a recommendation that's rooted in data and community needs that chooses one of those population targets. And it's really important to understand that that's just to accept what population you are holding in mind as you plan for that needed growth. So it's not like we're now responsible for going out and recruiting that many more people to move to Island County. It's more along the lines of, if our county commissioners have adopted a population projection of X amount, then this comprehensive plan should paint the picture of how we become ready to accommodate that population appropriately, with appropriate infrastructure, appropriate housing, appropriate transportation, et cetera. And that population projection work happens early because mm-hmm. all the other planning ties into becoming ready for that kind of growth.
That makes a lot of sense. You have to come up with the numbers first before you plan. I think, as far as I understand it, as a part of that process, there's interjurisdictional negotiation that happens because Island County is responsible for comprehensive planning for the county, but the county has jurisdictions within it, towns and cities, that have their own comprehensive planning processes, but are expected to take on some of the growth that is being accounted for within the comprehensive plan at large.
Absolutely. That's been a source of frustration for us in this planning cycle because the land capacity analysis that the city of Oak Harbor did basically showed insufficient capacity for the kind of population allocations that the Board of County Commissioners had originally intended to assign Oak Harbor. And we question the validity and the veracity of that buildable lands analysis. In past cycles, we have actually been a co-litigant with Island County to challenge Oak Harbor's faulty buildable lands analyses. And we and the county have won in court on that question. So it stands to reason that there should be an audit of the city of Oak Harbor's buildable lands analysis if we are using it to downgrade the population allocation for that city. And there are areas in the city that lack urban amenities, that lack sidewalks. There are areas that are not particularly densely zoned. The population per acre in Oak Harbor is very suburban in density as opposed to urban. And so there is this argument, and I would say that WEAN has put forward this argument that the Growth Management Act's purpose is to encourage population increase in cities where there can be services to support healthy, high-quality living for more residents, and that it is antithetical to the purpose of the Growth Management Act to reduce the population allocation for a city because they don't want to change how land is used within its boundaries, and then meanwhile increase population allocations in the county, which contributes to sprawl and also contributes to a challenge regarding septic infrastructure and other utilities that are not designed to serve higher populations in rural areas.
I think this speaks, I want to some of the things, I think we need to go back a little bit for that, because one of the things that I think is central to the Growth Management Act and is then central to comprehensive planning is that among its other goals and priorities, one of its main goals and priorities is to reduce sprawl.
Absolutely.
That it, it has a lot of other priorities that are competing, and as a quote goal balancing act, none of them are actually prioritized. However, I think that, it is as you said, there's health and quality of life, and Washingtonians value nature, and they value their rural areas, and they value the mountains and the streams and all of these things. And I think in recognition of that, there was a recognition that unplanned development would decimate the landscape. Whether it's because you love farms or you love, backpacking, or you're worried about ecosystems and wildlife habitat, without some kind of measured development framework, developers will develop. Right. And so to your point about sprawl and when we're thinking about buildable lands, I think for people to understand that, the buildable lands analysis is a part of the equation of how we come to the number of how many people we're planning for, right? That
Absolutely.
The county does it, each of the jurisdictions do it. And based on that analysis of what a buildable lands, where buildable lands are, then we come to the number of people that we are not interested in planning for, but that we have to plan for. And you mentioned something which in this particular planning cycle has been a source of frustration for us, is that in the initial, countywide planning policies process, the city of Oak Harbor agreed to a certain number of people. Right? And then they came back and said that they couldn't take that number.
My understanding, and it may not be a complete understanding, is that the county adopted a population projection and made some assumptions about Oak Harbor's capacity based on the county's studies.
Okay.
Oak Harbor's study of the same question came back with different numbers. And there is a requirement in state law for counties and their contained municipalities to partner. And so it's not exactly a hierarchical arrangement, but WEAN has put forward the hypothesis that the county would be in a legally defensible position if they kept those original population projections, conducted an audit of Oak Harbor's buildable lands analysis, and put forth the presumption that Oak Harbor could achieve that population capacity through internal rezoning and other means.
Right, because they're not currently, like you said. So one of the factors involved is that in order to place density where density already exists, which is one of the tenets of the Growth Management Act, you have to do infill development in cities. Infill development being you already build where there are already people, there's already infrastructure, and you're not building in places that are undeveloped and that don't have infrastructure, right? Like that's like in general what it is. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just wanted to sort of state what the opening premise of the Growth Management Act is. You know, the very first sentence of the act in RCW 3670A 010. The legislator finds that uncoordinated and unplanned growth, together with a lack of common goals expressing the public's interest in the conservation and the wise use of our lands, pose a threat to the environment, sustainable economic development, and the health, safety, and high quality of life enjoyed by residents of this state. So it's really at the very foundation of the Growth Management Act. It's about coordinated and planful growth where growth belongs.
Yeah. And so it's under that guidance, cities and counties are required to plan thoughtfully and to use, to use a roadmap that doesn't create sprawl. And I think one of the things that what we've been talking about right now is that in this process, one of the things that also, according to the planning department, delayed this process was that Oak Harbor's numbers did not match the county's numbers. And it seems as if they were not able to reach an agreement about that. And so what the county did, which is under question, I think still, is they reduced the population projections overall to accommodate Oak Harbor's numbers.
Right. In September of 2025, the Board of County Commissioners put forth that they would be reducing the adopted projection of 102,639 residents for the county to a new figure of 98,626 residents of the county, and that the 3,000+ residents that were being, vanished from this prediction were all going to come out of the city of Oak. So basically what they did was they left the population projection estimates for Coupeville and for Langley and for unincorporated Island County, including the non-municipal urban growth area of Freeland and the limited area of more intensive rural development of Clinton, which are sort of quasi-towns, but not, or quasi-cities, but not municipalities. They left everybody else's population projections at that original projection, and then just removed about 3,000 projected residents from the city of Oak Harbor to say, okay, Oak Harbor, we take your buildable lands analysis at face value. You don't have to plan for those residents. But when they did that, they admitted in public meetings, Board of County Commissioners members admitted that we know that this will exacerbate our housing affordability issue. We know that there is housing insecurity in Oak Harbor, that there's a real need for additional housing in Oak Harbor. And, frankly, I just think that if you look at the density population per acre of the city of Oak Harbor and compare it to almost any other healthy city, you're going to see that there is room for density that actually improves quality of life, density with urban services that actually makes it a stronger, healthier, more vibrant place.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, so that issue, which is an issue that's been central to this particular planning period, really stems out of the countywide planning policies. But that's not the only issue that we've experienced in this process. And so, we, as mentioned, the timeline had kind of been pushed for this planning. The initial adoption for this plan was supposed to be in June of 2025. Mm-hmm. And then the county asked for an extension to December of 2025 to give themselves more time and also to negotiate with Oak Harbor. And now we're in the first quarter of 2026, and we don't have a plan adopted yet because the county took more time to continue the process. And I think on the one hand, we are totally okay with the county taking that time because we'd rather have a good plan than a rushed kind of poor plan. But on the other hand, I know that we have been a little frustrated with the community engagement piece of this process. And I'm wondering if you could kind of explain to our listeners what the legal requirements are for community engagement, and then how we've been engaging and what we wish they would be doing.
Sure. Well, first off, I want to preface it by just saying that I know the planners are working so hard, and especially right now, they've just gotten a tremendous volume of material from the public. And so
that's true. I
want to hold some grace for the planners who are working very hard now. And we're speaking in late February of 2026. So, that said, the law requires early and continuous public participation. And very early in 2024, Island County published a public participation plan that really painted a picture of early and continuous involvement. And it talked about phases. It talked about a shaping the plan phase where the public would be involved. And then it talked about a refining the plan phase that would follow. And then it talked about a finalizing the plan phase that would follow. And each of those was described as being roughly the same length as the other. And I mentioned the grant that we received from the Department of Commerce that was Climate Commitment Act funding. And we really designed our process to sync with those county phases. So we had equity consultants reaching populations of our county that have historically been marginalized from planning. We had public education opportunities that were free and available that were designed to help people become ready to share their perspectives with planners. All of that was designed to happen during this shaping the phase plan, and then a little bit more during this refining the phase plan phase. I misspoke. I want to say designed to go in the shaping the plan phase and the refining the plan phase. Unfortunately, we did not receive a draft version of the narrative plan until December 10, 2025. So all through 2024, we tried to engage the public in participating absent a draft with which to engage. We ended up having to ask one of our equity consultants to give us a review of the 2016 version because there was no 2025 version to engage her expertise in reviewing. Our grant funding had a deadline and wound down before we even had material to begin to review from Island County. And so sometime last year, they did publish a grid of like a spreadsheet of goals and policies. And that was of interest, and it was a useful piece of the plan. But of the actual narrative plan, I think we got something less than 90 pages in calendar year 2025, February, if I recall correctly. And then the remaining so I think it became something like a 480-page document, wasn't published until the 10th day of December for a plan that was officially due to be finalized and submitted by the 31st day of December. So they really were just so late getting that material to us that it became extremely hard to perceive it as that early and continuous planning that was promised. And I think what would be most useful now, from my perspective, would be some reassurance that this was the shaping phase. We've seen a draft. It has been shaped. We offered some community input. Many entities, many people, maybe many citizens representing many viewpoints have offered feedback on that shaped plan. What we should get next is a draft that shows the revised plan. And we are nowhere near finalizing yet, according to the phasing originally described by Island County.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Marnie. I think that, to your point, the planners are working hard and they've received a volume of feedback from the community. But as you said, we just got that information. We received an over 400-page document that we had 60 days to review, which was during a holiday. So people were not reviewing this document, for a period of time during that 60-day review. And that comment period just ended on February 9th. And so we're talking right now at the end of February. And the planners have said that they have over 300 comments to go through, many of which are multiple pages long from different people, and that they're going to set up a matrix and have a feedback, they're going to have a system for feedback for these comments, which I appreciated that they mentioned that they were going to do that and that they shared that information. And I'm concerned that these comments will not be incorporated fully into the next draft of the plan if the county plans on finalizing this entire process by April, which is not very far away at all.
Right. We've heard the county commissioners express and the planners express that they plan to adopt the plan by April. And I think that it's been said that that's in order to lift a development moratorium that's been put in place pending the new comprehensive plan. Mm-hmm. That moratorium applies to redevelopment inside the LEMERDs, the limited areas of more intensive rural development like Clinton and Kent's Corner. And we have written several letters on the subject to our county leadership, and we've really elaborated on the legal pathways that are available to the county to either partially lift that moratorium or keep that moratorium in place through law-abiding means, absent adopting a comprehensive plan in a hurry. And we're very eager to see the county adopt a comprehensive plan when it's ready. But I would assert that there is almost no conceivable way that they are ready, given how recently the first draft was released to the public.
Yeah, I agree. I also think in terms of readiness, when we're considering readiness, there are two really big lifts that the county has to do this time around, which includes planning for affordable housing based on state mandate and planning for climate resiliency based on state mandate. And, there is a housing element that already existed within the plan, but affordable housing was not written into the goals and policies until this initial draft. And there was no climate element in this plan prior to a development consultant writing one for the county during this last planning year. And so, in addition to the fact that there are considerations about, whether or not the community has truly been engaged early and continuously in this process, I think there's substantive questions that are still outstanding about the actual policies that are new and being proposed. In particular, I know that we at WEAN have opinions about rural clusters, which are a how would you describe rural clusters to people, and what do you think the listeners need to know about them?
So rural clusters are a concept that basically allow development in rural areas to be done in a way that keeps the development impact of multiple structures constrained to a relatively smaller footprint than if those structures were each going on its own rural parcel. So for instance, rather than build a single family residence on several acres of rural land, this would be clustering multiple single family residences on that rural land with some caveats around setbacks and critical areas protections and open space set-asides. And this concept has been used in San Juan County to some fairly good results, as far as I know, because they don't have an urban growth area in which to put density. And it's been put forward here with two facets, one being the market rate rural cluster, which basically proposes to give people a density bonus for clustering buildings. And then the affordable rural cluster, which talks about, again, giving people a density bonus for multiple buildings. And we have put forward the position that the affordable rural cluster actually does have a really good use case for meeting the state mandate to make sure that there is housing for every income band in every part of the county, that people who cannot afford market rate housing can use this as a means to achieve home ownership or home rentership in the rural area. However, our buildable lands analysis shows that we actually have overabundant capacity for housing at market rate and above in the rural area, that there is more capacity for building new homes, that people making 80% of the average median income, the area median income or above, can afford to build or buy. So to put forward an idea that we need more market rate houses in the rural area and that we need a new pathway to accomplish that really doesn't align with the facts of the buildable lands analysis. And I just want to offer one more fact about it, which is that our planners have put this forward as a substitute for an old piece of code called the PRD, the Planned Residential Development. And that Planned Residential Development Code was arrived at through years of negotiation and compromise between the county and Whidbey Environmental Action Network many decades ago. I wish I had the year at hand, but I don't. But it's been in place for some decades now, and it hasn't been great. We haven't been delighted with the ways that code has been applied, but it also hasn't been terrible. And because it was a very hard-won compromise, we just think the county needs to be very careful substituting that with something different if it's not meeting an actual expressed need. We do believe that the affordable clusters meet an expressed need.
Yeah. Because the mandate is for affordable housing. That's what needs to be considered, not new market rate housing necessarily. And I would say one of the things that was in this rural cluster code that was initially presented, the initial draft of the code wanted to allow these rural clusters on parcels that were 5 acres, which was problematic from the standpoint that rural zoning is 1 unit per 5 acres. And I think it was good in the last meeting that the county Board of County Commissioners had with the Island County Planning Commission, it was good to hear them all agree that that was too small.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. We really believe that we would have a very strong case to appeal it before the Growth Management Hearings Board if they adopt a rural cluster code that has a density like what they were proposing in their original version of the draft ordinances, because the very RCW that allows rural clusters as a form of planning also states very clearly that the resulting density must be rural in nature.
Yes.
So any resulting density that is suburban or urban cannot result from a rural cluster code, and we'll fight the county on a rural cluster code that throws that protection away.
Yeah. I don't think we'll have to fight them on that, because I think they're actually in agreement with us about that, which was cool. But I do think that there is a lot of discussion around the need for market rate clusters and whether or not that does meet a need in the community. And I think that there's just a lot more discussion and deliberation that needs to happen around that code for it to be in a position where it's truly ready to be codified. Like, I think that's really one of the big concerns that I have with that. Even just when you were talking about the PRD code and how long it took to negotiate that, it's like, I don't think we want years, although that might be the resulting outcome depending on where this goes, but at least like very thoughtful deliberation, because it has huge land use implications.
Right.
And I think that's the thing about this entire process that makes me really wish the county would slow down, is this has huge land use implications. Like, a lot of the changes will impact the county in the next 20 years and beyond. And that's one of them. Rural clusters is one of the big ones. And then I would say that, I've been particularly interested in the climate resiliency element in the plan, which is new this time around, and is, the bones of that particular element are pretty good, I would say. And it would be great to see integration, that all of the elements of the plan are thought about from a climate resiliency perspective. So, we obviously, you and I have submitted comments ad nauseum on these topics. In fact, we submitted via certified mail a packet of how was it, like 800 pages?
It ended up being slightly over 900 with appendices, like material produced by other consultants and entities that we were referencing in our own work.
Yeah, and so we've certainly participated thus far in this, in this process.
I got to speak with Planning Director Jonathan Lang in person the other day when I went up there for a meeting, and I pulled him aside and I said, when you get our box, please don't be alarmed. It is entirely duplicative of submissions that we've already made by email. And it is purely being submitted via certified mail so that we can be certain that your packet matches our packet and that there won't be any disagreement as to the contents of our submissions. But we didn't want the planners to mistakenly think that we were submitting an additional 900 pages of input at the last hour.
I'm glad that you talked to him about that, because that would be alarming, I think, for anyone.
I really appreciate you pointing out that we actually want the county to slow down right now. We don't want the county to race to the finish line, even though the plan is late, because what they have is a really good start towards a truly serviceable, comprehensive plan that really meets the needs of this community now and into the future. Mm-hmm. They've done an amazing job thinking through what's going to be needed in our denser population areas. Like, what would Clinton and Freeland and other higher density rural areas be able to look like if they had septic capacity, if they had group septic alternatives? What would our sea level rise adaptation look like from a climate perspective? they've started to look into that question. They haven't integrated the answers to that question into the way they've treated land use in other elements. They haven't really threaded those sea level rise projections into planning for transportation infrastructure and capital improvement plans.
Or housing. Yeah.
Housing. They have published some maps that show sea level rise impacted property values, but not by impacted biodiversity or impacted threatened species or impacted forage fish habitat. So I just think they've begun to really tap into some very important, vital questions. And our county commissioners have adopted these 3 pillars of climate resilience, health, and equity as foundational to every decision that they make and everything that they do. And I just think comprehensive planning is such an important place to look at every decision and every element through those 3 lenses. And they've hired a broad gamut of consultants to work on individual elements with that consultant's particular expertise. But what that has yielded is a lot of cut and paste content that isn't yet customized for our community.
Yep.
We see climate threats listed that aren't our climate threats. There are, something picked up off of a list that might have been more applicable to a mainland county and pasted into our plan. And I think the community has already done a really good job of flagging that information and letting our planners know that it needs to be worked with. And so right now, I hope that what the Board of County Commissioners will do is really encourage the planners to slow down, work with this material, deeply integrate what they've learned, and come back with a plan that actually honors community participation, measures up to the standards of Washington state law, and paints a picture that's going to last us for the next 20 years as we adapt to these climate pressures and population pressures and economic justice questions.
Yeah, I think, yes to all of that. It makes me think about something that you've brought up before, which is the idea of iterative planning, that ideally the county should never stop planning for this. It's the cycle right now is that the county has to plan every 10 years for the next 20. So right now in 2025, we're planning through 2045, right? Well, it's 2026 now, but this should have been done by the end of 2025. So that's the planning period. But what it does by forcing it in this compressed timeline is it puts the planners who are involved in this process of having to compress it. And things change in 10 years, especially when it comes to climate. This is where I really harp on this, is our climate is changing rapidly, and rapid adaptation is required, which requires iterative planning and being constantly updated with best available science, right? Because in a 10-year time frame, the best available science is going to change a lot.
Right.
And in order to not be overwhelmed by the process, I think there needs to be an attention to this part of planning always.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. A few things come to mind. One is just to give the example of the elements that are not being updated. The shoreline element is not being updated because last year they submitted their shoreline master program to the Department of Ecology for approval. So that document, once adopted, will basically become our shoreline element.
Yes.
But that is basically almost obsolete from the moment it's submitted, because we're learning more and more every month about best available science and changing conditions and proliferation of unpermitted hard armoring on our coastal ecosystems. So that's just one example of an element that is going to have to be updated again, probably before the next planning interval.
Yeah.
Another example, they're not updating the historic element. Several of our historic treasures, both built and ecological, and by that I mean the anthropogenic ecosystems of prairies, which have been shaped by indigenous human stewardship for uncountable generations. Those are deeply historic. And I think that our understanding of the true history of this place can be absolutely responsive to the indigenous presence here in a way that it isn't in the current version. I also think that we have settler colonial buildings that are precious, beloved historic spaces that are threatened by sea level rise. So the historic element doesn't have up to the minute information. It doesn't tell the full story, and yet it's not being updated in this cycle because of the pressures of time and resource scarcity to engage in this huge breadth of work. And then thirdly, the Freeland NMUGA area plan. It is not being updated in this cycle, even though it's been admitted by planners and commissioners in this process that absent a septic solution or a sewage alternative solution for Freeland, it will be impossible to meet the housing allocation goals that are put forth in the 2025 comprehensive plan. So I would just argue that, or I would agree with you that iterative planning is essential, and that for every additional year that passes between adopting something and today, we just lose ground in terms of continuing to be proactively evolutionary as a community around planning.
Yeah, it kind of feels like saying you're only going to go to the dentist once a decade.
Right.
You know? Or like, I'll check my heart in 10 years, I guess. Like it just, that's how it feels. And I don't think it's given the same due as any other kind of health and wellness maintenance that we might consider maybe for ourselves as individuals. But we don't think of planning as a dynamic, continual process. And I think that's what it is.
I love the health metaphor because I think there's really something about equity and environmental justice and climate resilience that can be accomplished by empowering communities to be adaptive together. And one of the reasons the Department of Commerce offered Climate Commitment Act funding to organizations like ours was to empower communities, and especially to empower the members of communities whose voices have historically been missing, to be participants in this vital work. And so it is legal in Washington State and in Island County, if our planners were to decide to do it this way, if our Board of County Commissioners were to decide to do it this way, it is legal to do iterative planning instead of once every 10 years. You can always issue a comprehensive plan update in between cycles. And we have put forward a proposal that perhaps Island County could update one element per year. Might be occasionally necessary to update two elements in a year to make sure that they all get done in that interval of decade. But if the county were engaged in a continual lower intensity planning process with regular community forums, town halls, open houses, open comment periods, and tackle the work one element at a time, and then bring the lessons learned from that element into the next year's process, we could be continuously improving this plan without subjecting ourselves and the poor planners who are incredible at the amount of work they're willing to take on in this short compressed period. But it's a superhuman amount of work that's being asked. And I just think that spreading it out would actually be a skill building exercise for our whole community.
I agree. I think one of the things that has been illuminated to me in this process is how much time and education it takes to truly engage people in this, because, the average community member, especially people who are working people, don't really have the time to read a 480-page document, right? Like that's just a lot to ask of the public. It's a lot to ask of us as professionals also in the time frame we were given, right? To give substantive feedback in 60 days, while considering, a document that's over 400 pages and how it relates to state law. That's a lot to ask of. And we did it because it's our job. For community members who this is not their job, it's their civic duty, right? But it's not their job. How do they engage in this? and we've done the best that we could with our community, with our members, to really meet them where they're at and give them a pipeline of information that would allow them to give their feedback and participate. But I think that if it were just happening on an annual basis, it would give everyone a year to do it for one thing. Transportation. Let's educate the public about transportation. Let's educate them about what the current policies are, and let's engage them just on that. And let's partner with Island Transit. Let's partner with the biking community. Let's partner with all of these different people who have a vested interest in transportation. Let's partner with people, ADA compliance people. Like, let's do the work to figure out like what the dream could be and then put it on paper. I feel like the thing that gets lost when you compress the timeline and everyone's overwhelmed is that you don't really get to dream into the future. You just are trying not to drown. Right.
And, I think that sometimes there's a sort of a scarcity mindset that prevents our institutions from feeling a sense of abundance around time and energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm no stranger to needing to maximize staff time for what is most urgent, but this is so important and has such profound ramifications for the quality of life in our community, the health of our community members, the climate resilience of our community, the equity of our community. Like, if our commissioners truly want to live into those three principles that they say are fundamental to everything we do, involving the community thoughtfully in ongoing iterative planning is one of the most liberatory, empowering, transformational strategies that I can imagine. And the abundance of goodwill that would flow, and the abundance of staff empowerment that I believe would be possible through this approach would more than make up for the need to have this be a continuously staffed program, because it wouldn't have to be somebody's full-time job every day and overtime. It could be part of a healthy, balanced program.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I am curious whether or not there's any appetite for that. But I would say that I think the community would appreciate it. And I think that it would yield a better outcome for everyone.
Right. If nothing else, I think Would-Be Environmental Action Network will engage continuously in comprehensive planning.
Yes.
We'll always be trying to help people feel empowered and educated about this process as a tool of democracy that is their legal right. And, I'm planning to engage more deeply with the comprehensive plan than I have been able to do as of yet, because reading 481 pages over a 2-month span that included a multi-day power outage, multiple holidays, a several-week-long Island County shutdown, a several-week-long Would-Be Environmental Action Network holiday break, an outage of the Island County GeoMap tool.
Oh, yeah.
There were so many reasons why that 60-day period was actually far fewer than 60 working days, that it just stands to reason that even those of us deeply invested in understanding this document can't have given it the time it deserves yet.
I agree with that. And I'm hoping that the county will slow down, like we said, and engage in this process longer so that we can have better outcomes. But I also love to hear the commitment from WEAN to be engaged in comprehensive planning all the time, because even if the county chooses not to do iterative planning, WEAN can do it.
And I really hope, and, I want to express a really sincere belief that Island County can adopt a comprehensive plan that complies with the law, and that we won't have to fight this in front of the Growth Management Hearings Board.
Yep.
But, in every previous iteration of Island County's comprehensive planning, it has been a years-long process, and it's mostly been worked out after the fact in the courts when it comes to WEAN's environmental concerns about the plan. And so this time we've tried very hard to be as communicative as possible, as collaborative as possible, as participatory as possible up front. And I really think that if the planners are given adequate time to integrate the perspectives they have heard, that we might get a comprehensive plan that we can all be really proud of.
I think we should end on that note, Marnie. That's my hope too. Anything else you want to share with people before we go?
It's not too late to send in your comments. They said the comment deadline was February 9th, but they also acknowledged in public meetings that they'll always accept comments until this thing is completely finished.
Yeah, that's great, Marnie. I agree. Share your comments, participate early and continuously. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to us. We're happy to answer any questions you have about comprehensive planning as long as we know the answer.
And if we don't, we'll find out together.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here and for sharing your perspective and for all the work you do.
Thank you. And thanks for all your great work on comprehensive planning and more.
Another man up in the pulpit in the state house. Head of the table with a black pen, scratching egos, talking too loud. Externalize every outcome, every home gun, every profit. And kneeling down to the flashing numbers, the NASDAQ, the cold constructs. Running backwards, so just keep moving, just keep moving, just keep moving. Unlearning every lesson that our mothers tried to teach us.
This podcast is a production of the Whidbey Environmental Action Network and is made possible by our generous donors. Produced, edited, and mixed by me, Amanda Bullis. Special thanks to Marianne and Steve for their years of service through action and for lending their voices to this podcast. To WEAN's Executive Director, Marnie Jackson, and our board for their leadership. Special thanks to Whidbey musician Nathaniel Talbot for letting us use his track Intuition from the album Animal, available on Bandcamp.
Every day on your paycheck, a volume of confidence against the idea of your body being put into your own hands. So please don't hold it, please don't hold it, please don't hold it back. Unleash the power, the straight logic of compassion. What I need now ain't that old religion or the cold hard facts. Just need a woman's intuition, get us on track. Just need a woman's intuition, get us on track. Stepping out of the shadow of a false man's allegory, slowly erasing that old violence from the story, recoupling emotion, slow emotion to intelligence, granting the planters, healers, teachers, feelers a new relevance. What I need now ain't that old religion or the cold